In the heart of Houston, Texas, a city humming with heat and hidden stories, lived a 35-year-old police officer named Sarah Mitchell. Known for her steely resolve and piercing green eyes, Sarah was a woman of discipline and integrity. She patrolled the Third Ward with pride, a neighborhood that both revered and questioned her. Her mother, an elderly woman with silver hair and a Bible always in hand, often said, "Sarah, you're like a star shining alone in the southern night." That morning, as Sarah stepped into the precinct in her crisply tailored uniform, her heart beat with an unfamiliar tension. On her desk lay a file that sent a strange current through her. It was a case involving a man named Jason Reyes, a 29-year-old textile merchant who had been arrested under murky charges of having an affair with a married woman. The details were vague. No solid evidence, no witnesses, just whispers from angry neighbors and an emotionally charged complaint. As Sarah flipped through the file, her partner Officer Daniels leaned in and muttered, "Something's not right about that guy's case. It's on your desk for a reason." Curious and uneasy, she made her way through the precinct's narrow corridor toward the holding cells. The cement walls echoed with every click of her boots. When she opened the heavy door to Jason's cell, she saw a man sitting on the floor in wrinkled gray clothes. His skin was sun-kissed, and messy dark hair hung over his brow. When he looked up, their eyes met, and something inside her trembled. His eyes didn't carry malice, but something deeper, grief, longing, or maybe something she didn't yet understand. His voice was calm but heavy. "Officer Mitchell," he said, "I have one request." Sarah tightened her jaw. "Speak." Jason's voice lowered. "Before I die, all I want is to spend a night with a pure-hearted woman. With you. As man and wife. Just one night." The words slammed into her like thunder. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of shock and fury. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" she said, her voice sharp. "I'm an officer of the law. A woman who has protected her name and soul like a fortress. And you asked me that?" But Jason didn't flinch. His gaze didn't waver. "It's not lust. It's peace I seek. You're the only one who could quiet my soul. Promise me you'll at least think about it." Sarah turned on her heels and walked away, but her steps were shaky. Why her? Why that request? That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, reviewing the file again. The complaint was filed by a woman named Helen Alvarez, a middle-aged woman from Eastwood. Her written statement felt like it was drowning in pain rather than anger. Sarah knew she needed answers. The story was only just beginning. The next evening, under the amber haze of Houston's sunset, Sarah drove her squad car down a quiet residential street in Eastwood. Her destination, the home of Helen Alvarez, the woman who had accused Jason. The house was modest, with cracked stone steps and a creaky wooden fence barely standing. She knocked. Helen opened the door. A woman in her 50s, her skin was a rich brown and her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She wore a loose black sweater and spoke in a trembling voice. "Officer Mitchell, what do you want? I need to ask you about your statement regarding Jason Reyes." Helen lowered her gaze to the floor and whispered, "He destroyed our family's name. That's all I want to say. Just make sure he faces justice." "But what did he do?" Sarah asked. "The report is vague. You never explained the act." Helen's lips trembled, but she offered no clear answer. Instead, she simply said, "He should have stayed away from me. That's all." Puzzled, Sarah left, unsatisfied. Something in Helen's voice didn't sound like fear or anger, it sounded like regret. The truth was buried, and Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She drove across town to a quieter neighborhood, knocking on another door, Jason's family home. A frail older woman answered, his mother. Her silver hair was pulled back in a bun, and her face bore deep lines of time and sorrow. "You must be Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I am. I need to ask about your son." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "Jason has always had a kind heart. He loved deeply. Maybe too deeply." Sarah asked gently. "Why would someone accuse him of a crime like this?" The woman hesitated, then said something that chilled Sarah to the bone. Some wishes burn a hole in the heart. But that doesn't make them wrong. The next morning, Sarah returned to the precinct. Officer Daniels approached her with a puzzled expression. Jason refuses to speak with anyone but you. He says his wish still stands. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Against every rule, against every protocol, she went back to his cell. Jason sat against the concrete wall, his clothes now dirtier, his face more sunken. Yet his eyes held the same strange clarity. You promise, he said. Have you thought about my wish? Sarah narrowed her eyes. Not until you tell me the truth. About Helen. About everything. Jason smiled faintly. Soon. But promise me you'll be ready. You'll understand everything soon, Officer Mitchell. Sarah left the cell, her mind a storm. For the first time in her career, she felt pulled by something more powerful than justice. The threads of this story were tangled in desire, heartbreak, and something darker she hadn't yet seen. But she was determined to follow them, wherever they led. Driven by a mix of curiosity, compassion, and an unsettling sense of duty, Sarah dug deeper into Jason's past. She needed answers, real ones, not just cryptic words and cloudy accusations. That afternoon, she made her way to an old textile shop in the north end of Houston. The shop, now quiet and dusty, once belonged to Jason's family. There, she met a man named Charles Bennett, an old friend of Jason's. Charles, a heavy-set man in his early 40s with kind eyes, welcomed her cautiously. You're the officer looking into Jason? Sarah nodded. Yes. I need to understand what really happened between him and Helen Alvarez. Charles sighed deeply and sat behind the counter. Jason and Helen, they were engaged once. Years ago. It was all arranged. The wedding bands were bought, invitations printed. Everyone thought it was a match made in heaven. Sarah's eyebrows lifted. Engaged? Yes, Charles said. But right before the wedding, Helen backed out. No warning. Jason never spoke a bad word about her, never asked questions. He just broke. Why'd she back out? Sarah asked. No one knows. But a few months later she married someone else, Yasser Gomez. A man known in the neighborhood for his jealousy and temper. Rumor was, Yasser always believed Jason still had feelings for Helen, and he hated him for it. Sarah's mind raced. Was that jealousy enough to fabricate a case? Back at the precinct, she reread the incident file. Still no physical evidence, no witnesses, just Helen's vague accusation. Something felt off. And Jason's unusual request, it didn't feel like the whim of a criminal. It felt like a man grasping for meaning at the edge of his life. That evening, Sarah visited Helen again. This time, she was firm. I know about your past with Jason, she said at the door. You were supposed to marry him, weren't you? Helen's face turned pale. You don't understand. Then help me. Tell me the truth. Helen's eyes welled up. Her voice cracked. Yasser, he forced me to accuse Jason. He said if I didn't he'd ruin me. He did something to me the night before I made the complaint. I didn't want to, Officer Mitchell, I swear. Sarah recorded her confession, her hands trembling. This changed everything. The next morning, Sarah submitted the new statement to the district judge, requesting Jason's immediate release pending investigation. She also had Yasser taken into custody for further questioning. That evening, when Sarah opened the door to Jason's cell, he was already standing. Their eyes met, this time with no tension, only quiet understanding. You did it, he said. You're not free yet, she replied. But we're close. And I haven't forgotten your wish. Jason's face softened, and for the first time, a real smile broke across his lips. Sarah wasn't sure what was pulling her closer to him. Pity, admiration, something more, but she knew she was ready to find out. 3 days later, Jason Reyes walked out of the Harris County Detention Center, not as a free man yet, but as someone no longer shackled by false charges. The court had granted him conditional release under police supervision while the investigation continued. Yasser remained in custody, and Helen's confession had shifted the tide of the entire case. Sarah watched him step into the Houston sunlight for the first time in weeks. She had arranged for a private vehicle and sat quietly in the driver's seat, waiting. When Jason climbed in beside her, either of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "You kept your word," Sarah replied softly. "And you still have your wish." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't need a knight, Sarah. I just need you near me. That's all I've wanted." Her throat tightened. "You'll have that. But on terms that are right, with dignity, not desperation." Still, the memory of his original request lingered. A night. A moment of peace. And while it had once startled her, it now tugged at something deeper inside her, empathy, affection, even longing. Later that evening, Sarah received a message from a blocked number. "Walk away from Jason. This isn't over. He's still in danger." She stared at the screen, her heart racing. Who was behind this? Yasser? Someone else? With urgency, she turned to someone she trusted, an old friend, Pastor David Allen, who ran a quiet retreat home on the outskirts of town. A small white cottage surrounded by pine trees and silence. "I need a place for one night," she told him. "Private. Legal. There will be no wrongdoing." David, a man of calm wisdom, nodded. "I trust you, Sarah. The cottage is yours. I'll leave the keys inside." That night, Sarah returned to the precinct and arranged for Jason to be temporarily transported under special conditions. When he arrived at the cottage, she stood waiting in the doorway, dressed in simple jeans and a soft blue sweater. No badge. No walls. Jason approached slowly, cautious. "What is this?" Sarah smiled gently. "Tonight. I want to give you peace. But in the right way." Inside, a local Reverend Mark Taylor, awaited with 2 witnesses. Sarah and Jason stood before them. "I want to make this official," Sarah said. "Just for this night. In the eyes of God. No lies, no fear." Jason looked stunned. His voice cracked. "You'd do this for me?" "I would," she whispered. The Reverend opened his Bible and performed a simple ceremony. A temporary legal union, spiritual, binding for one night, as permitted by law in special cases of end-of-life wishes and compassionate release. No romance, no scandal. Just peace. Afterward, everyone left the cottage, and Sarah and Jason remained alone in silence. He reached for her hand, eyes brimming with emotion. "This moment is everything. Not for the body, but for the soul." Sarah sat beside him. "I know." That night, they talked until dawn. About dreams. Pain. Lost chances. Redemption. No lines were crossed, but something sacred passed between them. A warmth neither could name. And as morning light crept through the curtains, Sarah realized this wasn't about fulfilling a dying man's fantasy. It was about healing, for both of them. By noon the next day, Sarah and Jason left the quiet retreat and returned to Houston. The bond they had formed during the night wasn't simply the result of sympathy or circumstance. It was something that had quietly bloomed in the silence, a connection rooted in vulnerability and mutual respect. But their peace was short-lived. Back at the precinct, Sarah found a new message waiting for her at her desk, slipped inside a manila envelope with no return address. "He's not safe. You're not either. Stop digging." This was no longer just a case, it was a threat. Sarah took the envelope to the department's cyber unit. Hours of digital tracing finally led to an internet cafe on the east side of Houston. When Sarah and Officer Daniels arrived there, a young attendant nervously confirmed someone named Abdullah had used one of the machines. The name rang a bell. Abdullah Gomez, Yasser's cousin. Police raided his apartment that evening. Hidden in a bedroom drawer was a burner phone loaded with threatening messages and evidence of digital manipulation. He had been trying to scare Sarah away from Jason. Under pressure, Abdullah confessed. "Yasser told me to do it." He said Jason was trying to steal his wife. He said he had to be destroyed. Sarah returned to the interrogation room where Yasser was being held. This time, she wasn't just a police officer, she was someone with skin in the game. You framed him, she said coldly. You drugged your own wife. You staged the scene to make it look like Jason did it. You destroyed her reputation, and almost ruined an innocent man's life. Yasser, cornered and desperate, finally cracked. His voice was bitter. I knew Helen still loved him. I saw it in her eyes. I couldn't take it. So I made sure he disappeared. I made her accuse him. Sarah clenched her fists. And what about Helen? What about her pain? He looked away, ashamed. She was mine. That's all I thought about. The confession was recorded. It was over. Jason was cleared of all charges. Fully. Finally. But something inside Sarah had shifted. She wasn't just the officer who had seen a man freed from false judgment. She was a woman who had touched pain, love, and redemption all in the same breath. In the following weeks, Jason and Sarah began meeting in quiet parks and coffee shops around the city. No labels. No expectations. Just conversations that deepened over time. They talked about starting over. About forgiveness. About finding a place in the world where their story wasn't something shameful, but something sacred. And when Jason finally said, Sarah, I don't want one night, I want all of them, she didn't hesitate to answer. I want that too. But their journey wasn't done just yet. 6 months later, beneath a wide Texas sky painted with soft gold and blue, Sarah and Jason stood in the grand hall of a downtown Houston courthouse. This time not as officer and suspect, but as bride and groom. Their official wedding was a quiet, graceful ceremony attended by close friends, a few trusted officers, and Jason's aging mother, who cried silently throughout. Helen was not present, but she had sent a letter, an honest, tearful note blessing their union and apologizing once again for the pain she had caused. Reverend Mark Taylor, the same man who had officiated their temporary union months earlier, now stood before them once more. Today, he said, is not a union built on convenience or pity. It is a bond forged through trial, through truth, and through the deep ache of healing. As Sarah and Jason exchanged vows, every step of their journey played like film behind their eyes. The cold concrete cell, the quiet cottage night, the whispered threats, and the warmth of a single touch between two broken souls. I never thought peace would look like you, Jason said, his voice steady. Sarah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. And I never thought love could come from a case file. The reception was held in a modest banquet hall not far from the courthouse. There was laughter, soft jazz music, speeches from Officer Daniels and even Charles, Jason's old friend from the textile shop. But for Sarah and Jason, the crowd disappeared whenever their eyes met. Later that night, as they sat beneath string lights in the courtyard, Jason took her hand. Do you ever wonder, he asked, how it would have ended if I hadn't asked you that strange request? Sarah chuckled gently. I would have still found the truth. But maybe I wouldn't have found you. Their lips met in the soft silence of a summer night, no longer strangers bound by tragedy, but two people who had discovered grace through the storm. And as they held each other under the stars, the final question of guilt faded into the distance. Was Jason the criminal? Was Sarah the officer who crossed the line? Was Helen the true victim? Or was it Yasser, driven mad by jealousy? In truth, they were all human, flawed, lost, and hopeful. And in that flawed world, love had found its way through the cracks. The case was closed. But their story had just begun.